Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this second day of the second edition of the Global Solar Council Virtual Forum 2021. Yesterday was a day full of important guests, anyway, from all over the world. The focus was more global. And this day, we will focus on Sub-Saharan Africa. We have to thank for this day of events, the cooperation of Solar Power Europe and the kind support from Get Invest. This session is organized with a great support of participation of the Global Solar Council Africa Task Force. I'd like to recall that Global Solar Council have focus on three emerging markets: Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. It's very important also today when we talk about deployment of the solar PV in Africa and in general development of economic development in Africa, to talk about the fundamental role of the women that need to be recognized. The day or today is a mix of sessions. There are three sessions: this opening plus session 1 and session 2. And in the middle, there will be very important matchmaking session. Sessions is very important because you have the opportunity to meet people of this network and of course fix proper up to 10 minutes conversation and to enable the cooperation. We invite you to make questions during the three sessions. So you have two options. One is a chat between you, and there is also a live chat that you can find in the B2Match platform. So we invite to make questions, and of course, if time will allow us, we will try to answer as many questions as possible. The focus of today, as I was saying before, is on the sub-Saharan region of the Africa continent. And the goal is, of course, to explore the potential of solar PV in all kind of projects, small, big. We'll talk about the grid. We'll talk about policies, incentivization schemes, regulations. We will have, we'll talk about, of course, off-grid market, which is very important for the access to power, which is one of the main challenges of Africa. And of course, we will have a focus on the single key markets of the Sub-Saharan region with all the industry association. Today we have very important speakers from institutions, industry associations, and companies, very important companies, investors. So it will be a full day of debate and to understand really what is happening, what are the opportunities, what are the perspectives. We need to take into our consideration that according to the United Nations, by 2050, we will have more than 2.5 billion inhabitants, and half of them will be people under 25 years. And so solar PV it will be important not only to decarbonize, but and to meet the increasing power demand, but also to create jobs, to create competencies for all this young generation. Of course, we have in Africa a lot of barriers. When we talk about, of course, regulation for access to the grid, the missing incentivization schemes, the sun is really available much more than maybe most of the countries in the world. And and of course, self-consumption even and off-grid market will be very relevant. And of course, we need to stabilize the grid, which is quite weak. In this, the coming years and already today, of course, and will be even more in the coming years, also the off-grid or market is very competitive compared to the fossil fuels solution, and without, of course, taking into account the cost of polluting, of course, the air. We have, I have to thank a lot the task force, that because, as I said before, this session has been drawing on the experience of the people in the Africa Task Force of Global Solar Council. I'd like to underline with that we want really in this deployment put in the spotlight the role of women in the African, of course, electricity power development. So I wish you anyway the best for this day of very interactive sessions. I'd like to introduce for this opening three very important and complementary speakers. You see, you are going to see of course, the picture and the name and rules of the speakers. We have Nopenyo Dabla, Program Officer of Sub-Saharan Africa of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, which is very close our partner. Arthouros, Zervos, President of REN21, a global organization for the sustainable development and of course for the renewable sector, and is also another partner. And last but not least, Bertha Dlamini, President of African Women in Electricity and Power. This is also to underline the importance of the role of women in this deployment. I'd like to give the floor to the first speaker. So all of them, they will have a presentation. Nopenyo Dabla from IRENA, the floor is yours. And Nopenyo, please, you can make your presentation, please.
Thank you, Gianni, for this introduction and also the presentation, and also for having invited IRENA and through myself to be part of this very interesting session, where I'll briefly be presenting here about the opportunities and the challenges we see for solar PV, development in Sub-Saharan Africa. And as you already pointed out in your introduction, Gianni, we expect quite a big power demand, driven by the economic growth and the population growth in Africa. And according to our analysis, this is looking at different sub-regions, southern, western, eastern, central, and North Africa. In this analysis, we see a very big exponential increase, I guess, between 2015 as the baseline and 2030. I mean, this number is supposed to increase by around about 600 million gigawatts of demand in 2015 to about 1.6 in 2030. And to do so, I mean, to kind of respond to this demand, there's quite a lot of options that are available, and renewables in general, and solar PV in particular, have shown to be the go-to technology. And as that can be seen in the plans that have been developed by the different power pools in the region. at least those that have master plans or have done some long-term planning exercise. So here I'm talking about the East Africa Power Pool, the Southern Africa Power Pool, and the West Africa Power Pool. I mean, we still waiting for a more up-to-date long-term planning exercise from Central and North Africa. But in all these master plans that exist till 2040 for Eastern and Southern, and 2033 for the West Africa, we see good big room for the inclusion of solar PV. In the existing exercise for the SAP and the EAPP, the room they show for solar, as you can see, is not necessarily there, but our analysis has shown that in Southern Africa, they have the potential to add about 62 gigawatts of solar PV along in the region by 2040. And in East Africa, that would be 83 gigawatts. In West Africa, the master plan, which already exists, which was developed in 2018, also through the support we have provided to them on long-term planning, the master plan already includes the installation of about 36 gigawatts of solar PV alone by 2033. So this shows that there's quite a lot of good interest, at least from the planning side and the long-term planning side, for solar PV to be considered. And I mean, the trend over the past years has also shown that renewables in general have also been progressing in terms of installed capacity, but not so much in terms of the share of renewables in the total mix. And we can see since 2010 or so, solar PV has been gradually increasing, having the biggest increase in for renewable energy installations on the continent. However, when you see the global type of data in terms of installed capacity, we see that Africa still today only accounts for 1.48% of all the solar PV that has been installed globally. That is about 10.5 gigawatts, and that is very, very little for a continent that it's assumed to have, I mean, depending on the analysis, between 40 and 60% of the total global solar potential. And there's, I mean, opportunities are there. I mean, there's some justifications. I mean, we can see from the costs, the cost trends. I mean, you've all come across this graph before, which track the cost trends, done by the IRENA costing team. The latest publication came late last month. We see that the costs have been very much decreasing. I mean, the solar PV costs have been decreasing for about 90% since 2010. That's at the global level, and very much towards the lower end of the fossil fuel cost range. So it's not. So it's very, very competitive, and that's a global figure. But when you look at in the Africa context, you see the same trends. And of course, the costs are a little bit higher in Africa because some elements that make up the cost, such as the cost of financing, are higher in Africa, as the perceived risk for investors is also higher. But it has also been going down. And so that when you dive a bit more into the access sphere, we see that in the African continent, I mean, globally, we have when you look at the SDG 7, where we aim to reach universal access by 2030. Quite some progress have been done, but the projection is that in 2019 we're at 90% of access globally, and if all efforts go as business as usual, we'll only reach 92% by 2030. That still leaves a big gap, big access gap, as compared to the target. And also in terms of numbers, that means about 530 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa will still lack access to electricity in 2030. But then, in terms of the solutions that the technology solutions that are available to actually kind of bridge that access gap, we see that solar PV has absolutely a big role to play. especially in the African context. And when you see that, when you go business as usual, I mean, in terms of capital expenditure, the millions that needs to be spent between now and 2030, grid extension would have a 69 million requirement, but mini grids and solar home systems also will be the biggest share. I mean, that provide the best opportunity for investment in that sense. And mini grids, about a big share of those mini grids are solar or solar hybrid mini grids. So the room there for solar PV to contribute to bridge its access gap is not very small. It's actually quite big. And as we've seen over the past, solar PV has actually been powering quite a lot of this new access to electricity. Now looking at tier 1 and tier 2 levels, if you're familiar with the multi-tier framework, is about 70 million people have gained access with solar over that 3-year interval between 2016 and 2019. So solar PV has been contributing quite a lot already, and there is quite a lot that could come more from that. But I mean, we've talked about the opportunities. We talk about the technology solutions that are available, especially when it comes to solar PV. But then there are needs and priorities for the countries to actually be kind of put in place to be able to tap into these opportunities that are right to them. And those are the challenges that they have at the moment. And those are in the area of capacity building in one end, which would cover being able to assess the resource potential that's actually available and plan for it, both on the off-grid space, but also in the on-grid space, developing power purchase agreement and power procurement and other data related aspects, which are all very important activities for which IRENA provides capacity building to member countries and regions, sub-regions, within the Sub-Saharan Africa continent. But at the same time, the enabling framework also needs to be addressed in terms of create this enabling space for investors to come in. And to that end as well, IRENA's support on regulation, on grid integration, and long-term planning, and other macro analysis for the integration of renewables have come in quite handy. The other important aspect, which I think should not be neglected at all, is how then to actually make projects come to life. How to bring investors who usually say that they like projects, and project developers who usually say they like financing, how to bring them together through a common platform where they can actually interact and make projects happen. And that's why with the collaboration of SC4 and UNDP in coordination with the Green Climate Fund, IRENA is working on this project facilitation through the climate investment platform, where we look at doing this matchmaking aspect, which is a very core element of bringing these different parties together and make projects bankable. I mean, some success has already been happening over that through the CIP and our project facilitation activities. But at the same time, the CIP also tries to look into the enabling frameworks and kind of identify this further, newer policy-related needs that the countries will have to be able to address them, and also cover the overarching capacity building and knowledge dissemination aspect that also is also very much required to go forward. But so yeah, that will be quickly my brief presentation here. But I'm sure there will be quite a lot of questions to come in, and I'll be happy to answer them. So thank you, Gianni, and back to you.
Thank you, Nopenyo. Very comprehensive presentation. Actually, is perfect for starting and opening anyway, because you did really an overview from all the aspects anyway, the perspectives, the contribution of solar PV in the different segment, of course, of the access to power, and talk about, of course, dissemination of capacity and of course finance and so on. So we'll have a time. I see there are some questions arrived from the audience as well that we will put on the table at the end of the whole presentation. So thank you, Nopenyo, for the moment, and stay there so we can continue debate with the other speaker later on. So I'd like now to give the floor to Arthouros Zervos, President of REN21. Arthouros, the floor is yours for your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Gianni. So let me open presentation. Okay.
Very well.
What I will present is the exit on Africa of our Renewables 2021 Global Status Report. So, as you may know, REN21 publishes every year the annual reporting on renewables. Since 2005, we do that. And you see the different features that has, which includes the global overview, policy landscape. But I think what is important for our discussion is that consistently since 2005, we have had a chapter on distributed renewables for energy access, which is what is really relevant to our discussion today. And that's where I'm going to concentrate out of the 2021 issue of the Global Status Report. But before I'm going into that particular, let me just highlight a few of the regional trends that we are presenting for Africa in this report. So first of all, I would say that we have to, on the general context, since if we take the 2014 to 2019, and the demand that has been increasing, as we saw also previously in Africa, we have to really realize that only 1/3 of this rise in Africa's electricity demand was met with renewables in these past 5 years. So that, I think, gives the context. The other 2/3 were fossil fuels. The important element for Africa, I think, with respect to all the other regions, is that has avoided a coal-reliant electricity grid. We have not seen since 2014 a growth in total coal generation. We have seen in some countries, in others we see coming down. The total is really not increasing since 2014. And also if we see the coal capacity under construction or plant in Africa, we see something in South Africa and Zimbabwe are beating a new coal. So that's also an important element for the future also. On the other hand, which is quite surprising, is that some countries, and I'm saying here Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda, is that we have an oversupply of green electricity, which comes from hydro, geothermal, and wind on the grids. Because as a result, we have a slow demand, as the result of a slow demand growth and an overinvestment in PPA generation. And that creates in these countries some issues that one wouldn't expect. I will come at the end on this issue a little bit. So what we have seen on the positive side, I would say, is a growth on commercial industrial solar. So we have about 10 companies which are active in the continent, and we had also about 100 megawatts of capacity which have been installed in different countries and different contexts, like flower farms, cooking oil plants, university factories, in a series of countries that you see here, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Burundi, where see these CNI project rollouts. Also, we see medium to large solar PV projects that were commissioned or began construction in several countries, including Ethiopia, Ghana, Somalia, and South Africa. And also another element that we will see for sure in the future coming up very strongly, which is the developments that are occurring in electric vehicles. There is a lot of interest around the continent. So if we go to the main part, I would say, which regards our discussion with the distributed renewables for energy access. if we look, we have a series of countries that are that have between 5 and 10% of electricity coming from renewables. And you see in this list, which has 7 countries, 2 are from Africa, is Rwanda and Kenya. Rwanda with 9% and Kenya with 6.8% of electricity. What will be interesting to look for all the cases, except Nepal, which has a lot of hydro, as you see, this is the part of the hydro, is that mainly, if you look at Rwanda and Kenya, the main part comes from solar home systems. So we have a considerable, I would say, percentage-wise amount in these countries, which comes from the solar home systems, basically small or bigger, or a bit bigger ones, as you see in that. So I think this is also a positive element that we have seen happening in the last few years. On the clean cooking, the progress really remains quite slow globally, I would say. But in Sub-Saharan Africa, things even are worse than in other regions, in the sense that if you see here the pies, here the one referring to Sub-Saharan Africa is that only 10% really of clean cooking is available in the Sub-Saharan region. When you see that, for example, in the Latin American and Caribbean is 56%, in South Asia 27%. So this is really a big issue one has to deal with in the coming years. So we had a very strange year. It's a strange year, as we all know, because of COVID, and this also had effects for sure everywhere and especially in energy. Of course, on the total picture, it's quite interesting to see that we still, in renewables in general and PV in particular, we had increases, although all the other sectors of the energy have seen decreases in installed capacity, investments, etc. In renewables, we have seen a small but consistent increase. Now, regarding the off-grid sales, which were disrupted, of course, due to COVID-19, we have seen a decrease of 22% globally. But that was more in Asia than in Africa. So you see that we had a 10% decrease in East Africa, but on the other hand, on the West Africa, we had the plus 9% increase, in Central Africa, plus 22%, and in Southern Africa, plus 6%. So although, of course, there was a disruption, but I think that shows that there is a dynamics that are coming behind and which kept, even under this condition, the off-grid sales important. On the mini-grid part, it's clear that solar PV has been the fastest growing technology. From let's say and renewables in general, of course, are the main source of production in the mini grids. We were done some calculations on March of 22 on the existing and those mini grids that are operating in energy access, and 87% of them were from renewables. And what we have seen is that the solar PV has been the fastest growing mini grid technology, incorporating 55% of the mini grids on 2019, compared to only 10% in 2009. So this is the main really source that are coming very strongly, solar PV coming very strongly in the mini grid scene. So and also in 12 sub-Saharan African countries with high electricity access deficits, the renewables-based mini grids connections installed by private developers increased from just 2,000 in 2016 to more than 41,000 in 2019. So there is also a big, I would say, increase, and which is mostly in East Africa that we see happening in these last years. Of course, again, the COVID-19 impacted the mini grid sector. more than the rest, I would say, of the solar industry in 2020. And this is due to the complex logistics and the difficulty of accessing remote areas. So many projects that in development or being tendered were slowed or put on hold. Also interesting to see is the change of the type of investors that we have in distributed renewable markets. And this is, if you look the two here between 2018 and 2019 that we have the latest figures. So it's not COVID here, okay, yet. Still we see quite substantial change. Why the public financing, you see that it was halved compared to the previous year in 2019. And the private investment has been a key driver of the off-grid electricity access, which was accounting about 78% of funding in 2019. And then we see different, as you see there in this picture, you see the different sectors. So we have private equity, venture capital, infrastructure fund, and institutional investors increased their off-grid funding from 193 million US dollars in 2018 to 290 million in 2019. So again, the dynamics coming from the private sector there. And more in particular, as you have also in the box there, that corporations more than tripled their investments during this period from 22 million to 68 million dollars. Sorry. So this is a bit more complicated graph, but I think it's very interesting because it's the policy part that is driving, I would say, what we have presented before. So what we see are more policies for renewable-based electricity access globally. So this graph shows, in these four corners, has 4 regions. So we are concentrating on Sub-Saharan Africa, has South Asia, and shows the percentage of countries that have policies in the different subsectors. And we see, for example, of the framework of mini grids, and this is for 2010, 15, and 19. So we see really the Sub-Saharan Africa being the one leading here on the policy part, on the framework for mini grids, really in this, especially in the last 5 years, as we see here. But of course, we see increases also in the inclusion of off-grid solutions in electricity plan, and also on the framework for standalone solutions in a lesser degree. So the policies, as we know globally, are driving play a major role in the development, and this is also we see happening in different ways in the subcontinent, quite I would say quite importantly. So yes, and several countries also have included, as we know, the off-grid renewable targets for electricity access in their nationally determined contributions toward the reducing emissions under the Paris Agreement. And some countries, such as Nigeria, for example, have adopted new off-grid energy access targets linked to economic recovery plans in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just I want to end up with 2 words on the investments. So in 2020, the total investment on renewables increased by 2%. And that was, I was saying at the beginning, this is the only sector in the end on the energy that was seeing even a small investment. On the other hand, we have to say that the last 5 years has been stagnant, more or less, the total investment globally. On the other hand, what is interesting is that the investments in the last 5-6 years in developing countries are more than in developed ones. Though in 2020, because of COVID, in large extent, the investments rose in developed countries by 13% and went down by 7% in developing countries. Still, the developing countries remaining in total a bit more than developed countries in a total investment. the Sub-Saharan, the Sub-Saharan Africa that you see here, we have seen a decrease in the investment during 2020. And my last slides, which is this has to do with the multilateral development banks investments, which we have seen increasing, almost doubling between 15 and 19 on the renewables, from 6 to 11.4 billion US dollars. But on the other hand, we see that the percentage of renewables with respect to the other mitigation funding is going down. So increasing in absolute numbers, but going down in percentage-wise. So let me finish by coming back to this, one of the first elements that I presented, this story of the oversupply of renewable electricity that I said at the beginning, which is very interesting, I think, to look at why it's happening. And I think this is an element we should look more carefully, also in several countries, which is in reality, we see an expansion in grids, in mini grids, to a large extent, but which is going together with a very small demand. And for example, Kenyan Power had last week or a few days ago published their results, which were quite negative. And if you see the numbers, it's really impressive how big expansion they have done in adding their clients, the number of clients, so extending the grid in reality, or participating in mini grids around the country, but at the same time, the consumption remaining for the new customers very, very, very small. And I think this is one of the challenges we have to see in several countries in the future, how to deal with really trying to make the demand increase in order to have also the companies stay alive. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arthouros. A very, very complimentary presentation to the one of Nopenyo, going more in the details of the kind of solar system anyway, and also this very interesting also how the off-grid mini grid, of course, is growing, and very good to know that there are some progress on the policy side. But as you also underlined at the end, anyway, a lot need to be done. Anyway, the 1.48% of Africa compared to the others that Nopenyo was indicated at the beginning, anyway, is a good signal that anyway the potential is really huge, but a lot need to be done anyway in all areas. And good, of course, you pointed out the role of the institutions, you know, the developing banks. Yesterday we had a very good debate with all the developing banks, including the Africa developing banks as well. So as time is running, I'd like to give the floor to the third speaker, last but not least, Bertha Dlamini, President of the African Women in Electricity and Power. Bertha, the floor is yours. Bertha?
Thank you. I didn't realize I was on mute. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining from different parts of the world. It's been absolutely interesting and encouraging to listen to my esteemed colleagues in industry speak about the sector in general, its progress, and especially policy development on the continent. My insights today will focus on how we build an inclusive solar PV industry in Africa. And I'm hoping that after my presentation, I would have doubled the resolve of participants in the value chain of solar PV in forming collaborative and mutually beneficial economic partnerships with women-led and women-founded companies in South Africa across the value chain of solar PV, and also in integrating youth participation. As we consider the solar power in Sub-Saharan Africa, we also need to understand how the value chains are structured. We also need to understand Africa's compliance with global policy and the emerging value chains as a result of this compliance. So it is quite clear that Africa supports and has signed the Paris Agreement on climate change. In fact, all 54 countries have signed and 45 or even more have already ratified it. So much so that the African Development Bank has set up an Africa Nationally Determined Contributions Hub to aid and support the compliance and the transition across countries with mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies. And out of these emerges new value chains as new technologies are introduced. And so as we consider the participation of women and youth, we need to look at these emerging opportunities. The continent really only emits 4% total global greenhouse gas emissions. But 7 out of the 10 countries that in the world that are deemed to be most threatened by climate change come from Africa. And therefore, to accelerate initiatives or interventions that combat the impact of climate change is absolutely necessary. There is a huge potential, obviously, for renewable energy as a way of decarbonizing the energy sector on the continent, and as we pursue electrification. Energy and power sector is a commonly targeted area across most countries within the nationally determined contributions initiatives. When we look at the participation of women, there's been a lot of focus on employment equity. A recent study conducted by the International Renewable Energy Agency across multiple markets, including South Africa and other countries on the continent, found that women make up only 32% of the renewable energy workforce. And when we look at enterprise development, however, data is very sparse. And so we have to consider how we support entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs in the sector. When we look at fast-tracking electrification in Africa, I think the case for universal access to energy has already been made. There's definitely an interdependence and interconnectedness of energy and industrialization, with energy being the chief driver, or rather industrialization being the chief driver of energy policy and infrastructure planning. And as I refer to my country in South Africa, the Integrated Resource Plan is the electricity infrastructure plan that was recently ratified in 2019. Energy drives socioeconomic development and industrial activities. And we cannot think about socioeconomic development in the absence of the full participation of women and youth in, on the continent. As Gianni, you have pointed out, the growing rate of unemployment within those populations. 600 million people are still without access to modern energy. And electrification efforts are lagging behind. And my colleagues have reflected on how the COVID pandemic has impacted the sector. Population growth is soaring without access to modern energy. Therefore, renewable energy plays a key role in Sub-Saharan Africa, and therefore avails opportunity for entrepreneurs. When we look at sustainable goals and the support of sustainable goals, of course, Africa has signed up to support and to execute sustainable development goals. Combating climate change is a priority, as I earlier indicated. Ending poverty and hunger is definitely a socioeconomic priority for the continent. Improving health and education, access to modern energy, and enabling economic growth. All of these are not possible without universal access to energy. Therefore, you see this integration of energy in moving the continent ahead. A pathway to economic growth and prosperity for all is industrialization and a knowledge-based economy. This is very true for the continent, and this is not possible without the transformation of the energy sector. And therefore, as we consider the priority of energy transition or decarbonizing the energy sector and the emergence of new value chains wherein women, youth, and people living with disabilities can be supported through tangible interventions to participate meaningfully, we must also realize that Africa also has very dire socioeconomic development priorities. And therefore, you always have this tug of war between the two. When we look at the power pools across the continent, which drive the advancement of electrification and the advancement of electricity infrastructure, the Southern African power pool is obviously the most advanced and most connected grid, whereas all the other power pools are at different levels of advancement and development. Each individual country, when you consider each individual country on the continent, they do not have large enough energy systems to warrant local manufacturing facilities. And in some cases, policy is lagging behind to create an enabling environment for investors to consider their markets for manufacturing facilities for solar PV or assembly facilities for solar PV. Also, in terms of policy advancement, it has also delayed research and development in terms of intellectual property for renewable energy technology. And therefore, you find that countries are at varying levels of varying stages of IP development. However, if you consider the countries in regions, you will see that there is ample resources, raw material that contribute to the value chains of solar PV. And our responsibility as a collective ecosystem of energy globally is to look at how we can ensure inclusive participation of local companies in partnership with those that have intellectual property in bringing technology to local markets. And therefore, when we look at short-term to medium-term participation in the energy transition trajectory, we need creative and catalytic policy frameworks that ensures Africa's meaningful participation and inclusive energy and power sector. Some numbers that we consider: Africa is obviously hugely endowed with energy resources, both renewable and non-renewable. And as a region, it can meet its future energy demands. For example, statistics are out that the technical potential for the continent is at least plus minus 11,000 gigawatts. Solar on its own contributes 10,000 gigawatts. Therefore, renewable energy has a potential to support Africa's industrialization drive as part of the energy mix. And as we talk about industrialization and we talk about SDG number 5, we then see the emergence of the necessity to support women and youth and people living with disabilities to participate as suppliers of products, services, solutions, and systems in these value chains. And as of 2016, contribution to the energy mix by solar energy was only 18% on the continent. Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 14% of the world's population, but only 4.5% of global primary energy demand comes from the continent, again, illuminating the vast opportunity that exists for electrification. If you remove South Africa, the continental access rate is about 41%, with South Africa 52%. North Africa is performing superbly at 100% access, and the ideal is to have universal access across the area. As an organization, we focus on 3 sustainable development goals, which is gender equality. The Generation Equality Forum was just concluded last week, which emphasized on moving the needle, shifting the needle across all multiple sectors in the economy from a quarter participation of women to 50% participation of women. And therefore, in the energy sector, we see the solar PV value chain presenting unique opportunities for green economy recovery, accelerated trajectories which enable the needed progress towards the sustainable development goal. Of course, access to affordable, modern, cheap energy will also contribute to economic prosperity of women, youth, and people living with disabilities on the continent, and of course, promoting sustainable employment. When we look at the PV ecosystem at large, we have to look at the global manufacturing benchmarks to assess the participation of African countries in the manufacturing value chain of solar PV solutions. CIMAC released the Global Clean Energy Manufacturing Data Insights in February of this year. And as clean energy manufacturing becomes a great share of global economy, manufacturers, decision makers are seeking opportunities across the world to manufacture, to sell, to install clean energy. And in this area is where we need to emphasize the need for collaborative relationships. And so when you look at PV modules and you look at direct value added, you can see the countries that are leading in those space globally. And if you look at also the demand share across the solar PV technology, whether it's the PV module in wind, LED chip, LIB cells, you can also see the countries that are playing a significant role in participating in those value chains. And you see that African countries and the continent itself features only minimally as part of the rest of the world. Same with production share. This is also commensurate with the local energy systems of those countries and the global product demand as they trade with other countries. The green transition requires a sustainable, inclusive exploitation of natural resources in Africa, ensuring that African companies, African women, African youth, African people living with disabilities have an opportunity to participate as providers of products, services, and solutions and systems. And this cannot be left to chance. And so the challenges that we see as an organization is, as the previous speaker has highlighted the trends in investment. For investors to consider our market favorably, they need data that assures them of the demand of products. And this is where we are lacking. Potential resources, actual installed systems, or current use is difficult to measure, and we don't have composite data, and therefore difficult for investors to come through. Small-scale solar PV penetration is difficult to quantify due to inadequate tracking of installations at a commercial and industrial level through agricultural sectors and other intensive energy users and in our economies, including residential. We see a slow pace of electrification in Sub-Saharan Africa, resulting in low industrialization activities and therefore compromising the effective participation of women in industry. COVID-19 has triggered a global recession with a negative impact on supply chains. My previous speaker has highlighted this. Policy certainty, also a challenge that has been seen in South Africa, a challenge that is witnessed in other markets, and we need that certainty for the participation of women, the designation of markets for women entrepreneurs to access markets, to access finance, to access technology in order to participate effectively in the sector. And so we need to create an inclusive solar PV industry on the continent. Clean and cheaper energy is definitely recognized as one of the ways for an inclusive COVID recovery trajectory. Now, I speak a lot about women entrepreneurs, and I wanted to highlight what is particularly important for the continent to have interventions that are pragmatic, that are economically beneficial for women and their partners. Africa's female entrepreneurship is the highest in the world, with 27% of women on the continent engaged in early stage entrepreneurial activity. Women in Africa make up 58% of the continent's self-employed population. Therefore, whether you are in wind energy or solar energy or hydro or nuclear or fossil fuel energy and looking at transitioning those areas to clean energy, you have to recognize the vast reservoir of entrepreneurial potential and talent and resilience that can ignite industrial activity through the integration of women. The African continent free trade area is the world's largest free trade area by a number of countries, and it's opening up a vast trading opportunity for the globe and for Africa. And it's at this point that we need to be very intentional, very deliberate about the integration of women, youth, and people living with disabilities. It is predicted that by 2020, there will be 100 million women in the labor force. And therefore, in the renewable energy, we need to shift that needle from 30 2% in employment, and to a higher degree of enterprise. As African women in energy and power, we believe that we should not leave anyone behind in this global race to decarbonization. Equitable participation of women and youth as providers of products, services, solution systems across Africa's solar power sector is important. We cannot leave it to chance. We have to have effort that is intentional, deliberate, collaborative, and actually shows mutual benefit between local companies and international companies that own IP. And therefore, across the entire value chain, whether we're talking about project design and development, the use of raw material, wafer manufacturing, cells manufacturing, solar module assembly, or solar panel assembly, construction or operation and maintenance. We work with project developers, independent power producers, original equipment manufacturers, engineering and procurement and construction companies, utilities and governments and private sector that are seeking to transition to clean energy, to integrate women by giving access to market, access to network, access to skills development, access to finance, access to partnerships that will enable them to establish and run sustainable solar energy businesses in the market. And we are ready to partner with global players to deliver these programs. We've got 11 established chapters in 11 countries with women leaders that are ready to partner with global players to enable the participation of youth and women in the solar sector. My concluding remarks are really to encourage a collaborative effort. The greatest force that the world has ever seen is an intentional community of persons rallied around a shared purpose and a shared meaning. The Global Solar Council's mission should be to create an inclusive solar economy across the world with real, tangible, effective, economically beneficial participation by local companies in the value chains, with equitable and profitable partnerships by all women, youth, and people living with disabilities in pursuit of our universal access to clean and affordable and modern energy. I hope my presentation has doubled your resolve for mutually beneficial, collaborative, multilateral relations and programs that integrate women sustainably so that we can shift the needle. For Africa, we must create the right policies that support, and Africa we want to see, that support value chains that show the participation of its people and exploitation of natural resources also for the benefit of African companies. And definitely we are your partner of choice, and you can reach us at these contact details. Gianni, this is my contribution to the conversation today.
Hello, just a moment. I have a problem of video. Okay, that's now you can see me. Yes, thank you. Actually, Bertha, your presentation has been very much inspiring us, and thank you for the suggestion to Global Solar Council. I invite you also before this meeting, this session to the Global Solar Council Task Force, and your reality, your of course suggestion anyways, what we are trying to do, but with your support, maybe we can do even better. And thanks also for highlighting anyway the role of energy, solar and energy in general for the general growth of Africa in all other sectors. The link of solar PV with the SDGs 5, 7, and 8, very important. And yes, there can be not sustainability without ethics, without good governance, without inclusion. Gender is really fundamental for the whole value chain, from manufacturing to the end customer to the consumer, is very, very important. And of course, we need to work together. So we are really running with the time, but I'd like to show one interesting video that will be inspiring in the conclusion of such a nice opening. Yes, Gabriel, if you can show this video, I think it would be very much inspiring us.
There's a satellite image photo that's fairly famous of, the world at night, and you can see many unlit areas of Africa, most of the non-urban areas not connected, not part of national grids right now. I think that you'll start to see pockets of light pop up that are not connected actually to the main grids that you would currently see. You're going to see the off-grid areas starting to grow and expand into those unconnected areas at a faster pace than the grid expansion is occurring.
Solar power is definitely going strong, and the future is bright because keep coming down. There's new technologies and new approaches that keep getting combined in exciting new ways.
When a farmer switches from manual watering or depending only on rain for their farm, and they switch to a solar water pump, they're able to at least double their income, and oftentimes much more than that.
We've put so much effort in developing our own people. Our current HR director started in the call center. The lady that's running the whole call center, she used to work in the shop.
When it comes to Africa, my number one advice to anybody, whether they are investors or solar companies looking to expand into the region, is Africa has a lot of opportunities when it comes to renewables, solar specifically, and within solar, there are opportunities in the utility scale, the C&I scale, the mini-grid sector, as well as the solar household sector.
Thank you, and thanks again for the cooperation for Europe and the support of GetInvest. Nopenyo, Bertha, Arthouros, there is no time, unfortunately, of a proper debate, but really, anyway, I invite you to unmute us for final remarks, anyway, also to inspire also and give the floor to the next session where we've been a lot of topics that you touched. I think sometimes is easier to build from scratch than to change anyway something which is already established. In the developed countries, sometimes we have difficulties to pass from coal. Arthouros, you mentioned that there is not so much coal in Africa. Fortunately, anyway, to switch from all the polluting source of energy to new ones. But in reality, sometimes it's easier to start from scratch. And in Africa, we talk about electric vehicles as well, no? And so maybe we can, there are, Bertha, as you underlined, there are 600 million people without electricity. So they don't need to convert from one source to another. They need to start from zero. And of course, so what's in conclusion in this opening? Anyway, what's your main suggestion anyway? And anyway, what Africa and Nopenyo should do anyway, if you want to highlight one main point in order to really to go out from this jump from this 1.48% of solar PV compared to the rest of the world. Nopenyo.
Yes, thanks, Gianni. I think in my opinion, I think the one and very key part is proper integrated planning. Right? That really takes into account what's needed to be done on the on-grid space, on the mini-grid space, and at even smaller scale. Looking at, and those this proper planning exercise should be based on data, reliable data, but then feeds into policy development and regulatory tools that will help attract investment into those different segments of the market. And I mean, we have seen some very good examples of some countries which have actually trying to do that exercise. I mean, one country that's not often talked about is Togo, for example, which has done a very clear planning in that aspect. And you know, last month we inaugurated a 50 megawatt solar plant there. But you know, this planning exercise is actually very important, and that will help inform not just the investment aspect, but also all the socioeconomic needs that need to come along with it, in terms of training the African youth and create jobs for them. So that planning exercise will actually help inform what's the need on that end as well. And you know, we talk about all the climate and all the climate objectives and as well. And planning remains quite a big key in that. And unfortunately, fortunately, we're seeing more and more efforts as such being done at national and regional level, but then we need that to be strengthened.
Thank you very much. Nopenyo, strategy planning is really key. Arthouros, your recommendations, how to boost anyway?
I would go to the same direction by saying that for me, the most important, and we have seen it in other parts of the world, starting from Europe, is the policy framework that is set, and which is really the number one to be able to do. And also related to that is the framework for allowing, in reality, the investments to be done. From the developed world, I would say, and especially with the multilateral banks, etc., I think the help will be on de-risking really the investments in the continent, and doing that in different ways, as we know that are there. But I think these are the important elements I see. And I will conclude, Gianni, from what you said, there is a big disadvantage that we see: 600 million people in reality without electricity. But there is also an advantage. They don't have the system that we have in Europe or in America, and we want to change because there is no. So starting from scratch, as you say, there is an opportunity there that then doesn't have to pass from what we did in the developed world. And I think this disadvantage really to return into an advantage for the future.
Yes, thank you very much. An advantage, and policy, technology, policy, and finance need to go together. Bertha, anyway, your inspirating really presentation. Anyway, from your point of view, anyway, youth, women really are really the big power for this to happen in Africa, for the big change anyway. Of course, we need to really include everybody disabled, and anyway, we need to be, Africa can be maybe an example for the rest of the world after this pandemic that is disrupted. Bertha, your point of view, finally.
I support my colleagues. Definitely you need policy consistency. With policy consistency, you give the rest of the world assurance of your strategic direction and your plan to create an enabling environment for participation. But what is also interesting is multilateral development banks are starting to be very strict to look at large-scale infrastructure projects that have gender considerations. And therefore, the policy advancement should include the designation of market for women, youth, and people living with disabilities to enforce their integration in these projects as they develop in our local markets. So it's a combination of factors. You need consistent policy. Consistent policy creates an enabling environment. There is a shift globally for gender mainstreaming and youth participation. You need to have a platform where you build the requisite competency so that local people have the required skill sets and the business acumen to take advantage of these emerging opportunities.
Thank you, Bertha. Of course, as I have to say policy, but you said policy which are inclusive, which is very important. And we need to not only, anyway, developing banks are moving this direction, but we need to also to encourage and also local companies and people anyway in this, if you want really to change the market. And unfortunately, there is no time for the question, but anyway, I think I thanks all the people that make questions. We reply, especially Mrs. Cortina Tabaxwiza. We will, and some answer you replied, Bertha, because the question from her was, anyway, where the women, the 34%, where are the women anyway in the different roles? But you had a very good chart explaining that. Anyway, the women need to be not only in some roles, but we need to be in the leadership, in the management, anyway, if we really want things to change, really. And I thank you all for the great introduction. I think we gave a nice overview of and we inspired our next speakers and the audience. And in less than 1 hour and 50 minutes, there will be the first session, very important, talking also right about policy with the very important speakers. And on the meanwhile, we have matchmaking on B2Match. Anyway, people are meeting, making cooperation. As Bertha said, cooperation is key. So I thank you all, Nopenyo, Bertha, Arthouros, for your great contribution to this opening, and enjoy the rest of the event. And so we can conclude in this nice way this first opening of the second day of the Global Solar Cancer Virtual Forum 2021. Thank you very much all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gianni.